gentlemen, welcome to the main room again. In this final keynote speakers will be led by Miss Jenny. Before we start the sessions, let me briefly introduce you about our moderator for today, Miss Jenny. Miss Jenny holds a bachelor's degree in international relations with a focus on defense and security studies from President University. Started her career in 2015 at the most active foreign chamber of commerce in Indonesia, the British Chamber of Commerce, BRICOM, with the Business Center Unit, where she worked closely with the team to promote business opportunities in Indonesia to the United Kingdom businesses. She has led various projects, including inward and outward missions, seminars, identified opportunities for British companies to win business in Indonesia, and devised strategy to ensure these are effectively promoted to British business. She is now appointed to lead a new business unit within the BRICOM Indonesia, BRICOM Education Center, to assist Indonesian students who are looking to pursue their further study and or career in the UK. She believes that the investment in international education is indeed a high investment for a family in Indonesia. Hence, she is passionate about providing intensive support for students and or their parents because it is fundamental to aid the return of investment from international education. To Miss Jenny, time is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I am Jenny, as mentioned by the MC just now, the representative of BRICOM Education Center, and I am very honored to be your moderator today. But first of all, welcome to our the third keynote session. Very honored to be your moderator, and also very pleased to have the representative from our university partner joining us today live from the UK, Dr. Ian Handy of University of Portsmouth. Dr. Ian Handy is a coastal ecologist, and his expertise is focused on marine ecology of University of Portsmouth, lead advisor and scientist of Operation Wallacea. Associate lecturer in marine biology, climate change of University of Cornwall, and last but not least is board of directors Without Borders Oregon. On his many international research trips, Dr. Ian has gone to extreme lengths to collect his data. When I said extreme, everyone is very extreme because he has come face to face with crocodiles, encountered the world's poisonous snakes, and also survived sinking boats. So very interested to hear about that story as well, Dr. Ian, if the time allows, obviously. And on this special occasion, Dr. Ian will specifically talk about fantastic mangrove, why we need them, and also effective restoration. I do understand that Dr. Ian has quite limited time today with us, so I don't want to steal his thunder any longer. So without further ado, I'm just gonna hand the screen over to Dr. Ian. The screen is yours, Dr. Ian.
So thank you, Cheney. First of all, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah,
all right.
Wonderful, thank you. So lovely. Thank you for the fantastic introduction. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to deliver a talk to you all today. So as already mentioned by Cheney, I'm a tropical marine ecologist. So although I come from the UK, I've spent 10 years or over 10 years of working in Indonesia, specifically in Southeast Sulawesi, but I also work over in the Caribbean as well. But I focus on coastal marginal ecosystems. So in particular, mangrove forests and seagrass beds and coral reefs. So today, as Cheney's already mentioned, I'm going to be delivering a talk about why we need mangrove forests. And I'm sure, as all of you are aware, why mangroves are so very special for fishery production, for mitigation of climate change, and all of the other what we call ecosystem services that they provide. So an ecosystem service is a natural solution for humans that can enhance nature-based solutions. So for anything from mitigating climate change to enhancing fisheries to reducing rising sea levels and coastal erosion. So hopefully this will work. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen, and here we have the presentation. So can you all see that, everyone? Yes,
Yep.
fantastic. And so what I've done here is managed to put on there a virtual laser pointer so you can see things that I'm going to be alerting you all to. So by means of a introduction or an overview, I'm going to be talking about the importance of mangrove ecosystems, of why we need them. And again, I'm sure you'll know much of this information, but I'm just going to drive home why we need these fantastic ecosystems. I'm going to be talking about carbon credits as well. So how we can actually bring back our lost ecosystems and manage those habitats and earn money from them. So there's a lot of revenue involved in this. And I'm going to talk about active restoration of those impacted sites as well. So a bit of context and a bit of background, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. What you see here is you see me highlighting with the laser pointer. Think of this as the total area covered by the ocean. Okay, so this is the total area covered by the oceans. So these are all the marine ecosystems that this incorporates. And this tiny green slither of this whole area is in actual fact the total area of mangrove forests, seagrass beds, and seaweed, so kelp, all of those things, and salt marsh. So that's the entire area that these marine coastal vegetated ecosystems will take up in terms of the whole area of the marine ocean ecosystem. Now, if you think about all of the carbon and CO2 in the atmosphere, which are, as you know, the greenhouse gases that facilitate and cause climate change, the ocean can capture 55% of all of the carbon in the ocean, okay, from the land and the ocean. So it takes up more than half of the CO2 from the atmosphere. So it's vitally important in actual fact. Now, coastal marine vegetated ecosystems, so we're talking about mangroves, we're talking about seagrass and salt marsh, they occupy only 0.2% of the whole marine area, which is this small slither here, 0.2%. However, of that small area, those marine vegetated ecosystems will capture more than 50% of the carbon in the oceans. So they're hugely powerful in their ability to actually restore and solve the problems of climate change. So they're super important. And of that 50%, in actual fact, mangrove forests will actually store between 10 to 14% of that ocean carbon. So mangroves really are the kings of carbon store. So they're very rich in the carbon. So let's think about why we should restore marine and coastal oceans. So if we think of the whole planet, 70% of the planet is water. Now, therefore, that means only 30% is land. So it's going to be unlikely to restore our lost ecosystem services because there's going to be an increase in people in another 30 years or so, up to about 10 billion people on the planet. And so this is going to be an extra billion people. So in other words, an extra increase on the resources that we're already exploiting. Now, already at the moment, everybody, we're at about 2 planets worth of resources of exploitation. Okay, so this means we're losing our ecosystem services. Therefore, our ecosystems are losing their ability to function. In other words, drawing down CO2 and providing, for example, a rich fishery for us to provide protein sources to the many communities that are dependent upon our coastal ecosystems. So we need to look at the oceans to restore and actively restore and bring those ecosystem services back. And also, everybody, our marine vegetated ecosystems, and this would be mangrove forests, seagrass beds, salt marsh, seaweed, and phytoplankton. If you think about the air you breathe, new research has come out to suggest that anywhere between 50 to 80% of the air you breathe comes from the ocean. So don't get me wrong, the forests are the lungs of the planet, but the ocean is more so the lungs of the planet. So we really need to protect our ocean and coastal ecosystems. Now, we've all seen these graphs before, so I'm just going to walk you through these. So here we have global temperature increasing on this y-axis here, and on the other y-axis we have CO2 concentration. So we have the greenhouse gases. Now, as you can see, over time there's been an increase. Now, I'm just highlighting what you see here. I placed on here the IPCC, the International Panel for Climate Change. These are big meetings, as I'm sure you're all aware, to address climate change. Governments get involved in this, scientists get involved in this, and concerned citizens to talk about how they can mitigate and reduce the impacts from climate change. Now, what we see, of course, is 1990, we had the first IPCC conference, then in 2000, and then in 2010. But what do we see with the trends? We see an increase and a steady increase of CO2 releasing into the atmosphere. So in other words, at the moment and currently, we're not doing a very good job at pulling our belts in terms of reducing our CO2 footprint into the atmosphere. But we can do better. But the tide is beginning to turn because we're now starting to have more and more awareness of our coastal ecosystem, our rich coastal ecosystems, particularly in Indonesia, of why they're so important and the riches they can bring, not only to solve nature and the environment, but also to bring back those coastal ecosystem services and bring back the value to those local communities. So again, just a bit of background, everyone. Okay, we have a very stylized, basic map of connectivity between the mangroves. And I'm sure every one of you in Indonesia have seen these rhizophora trees with the root systems jutting down, stabilizing the sediments. Then hopefully you'll have these thriving seagrass beds adjacent to those mangroves. Then adjacent to the seagrass beds, you'll have your coral reefs. Now, the reason why the mangroves are so vitally important is because the root structures here will stabilize the sediments. The root structures will provide a home for many juvenile important species. Many of these juveniles will be herbivores. Now, as the herbivores fish get older and move to their more mature states, they then migrate over to the coral reefs. Now, this is really important because it's those herbivorous fish, like the parrotfish, for example, they will keep the reefs healthy because they keep the macroalgae from overgrowing the coral reef. Okay. Now, of course, algae will outcompete the corals, therefore reducing the corals, therefore reducing the complexity of the reef, meaning you have a reduced biodiversity. Now, here's a really good fact for you. 25% of all marine life are dependent upon coral reefs. So the mangroves will stabilize the sediments, which keeps the water very clear. Therefore, the corals can photosynthesize and the seagrass can photosynthesize, added towards the purification of the water. Therefore, enhances the coral growth and increases the fish production. Therefore, this gives a greater nursery function back to the mangroves. So you have what we call a positive feedback loop. Okay, so these are the sorts of things that I found with my research in Indonesia over many, many years, in that we would have healthy mangroves, you have healthy seagrass beds, then you have always a healthy coral reef. This then would provide opportunities for flow of energy, not only within the ecosystem, but between ecosystems. So you have what we call a resilient habitat, and you're future-proofing that habitat, therefore providing economic and monetary opportunities for the people dependent upon those ecosystems, which we'll talk about in a little while from now. Now, again, just to drive this home, everyone, mangrove and seagrass and coral reef linkages are very important, particularly in Indonesia, because you have the whole system approach, okay? As we've talked about, they have a nursery ground and they're vital for the adjacent ecosystem health, as I just mentioned. So if I just talk you through these graphs here very quickly as a bit of context, then I'm going to tell you a little bit about my research. So what we have here on the y-axis is fish biomass, okay? Now, in this particular study by Rogers and Mumby, what they did was look at different states of the ecosystem. Now, this was vitally important because what they did was assess degraded habitats. And as you can see, there were very few fish in terms of their biomass, but they looked at degraded habitats opposite mangrove forests, and there was slightly more fish biomass. But if you look at an area of a coral reef without mangroves or seagrass beds, you have a fairly modest biomass of fish. But if you have mangroves and coral reefs associated with each other in close proximity, you have even higher fish biomass. This is also the same for other fish species, in this case, particularly parrotfish, which are in some healthy reefs in Indonesia in high abundance. So we need that high connectivity between the different ecosystems to drive all of what we call that trophic energy flow, which enhances the health and richness of your coastal ecosystems. Now, ecosystem services will help the environment, it will help the ecology, and it will help tourism as well. So this will bring people to those sites, spending money and helping the local communities. Mangrove carbon, as I touched about 5 minutes ago when we talked about those key ecosystems drawing down CO2 from the atmosphere, those greenhouse gases, then storing them. Much of the carbon in above ground biomass in the trees of mangrove forests are quite high. In actual fact, very similar to a tropical rainforest. However, very different from a tropical rainforest, mangroves have the ability to store vast amounts of carbon in their soils. This is because the soils are waterlogged, and so therefore the carbon gets locked in and remains there. Now, if you look at this final stat here, there's some studies, particularly in mangroves in Indonesia, but you could have 4 times the amount of carbon stored in mangrove forests compared to a tropical rainforest. So mangroves are hugely rich in resources of those carbon stores. So there's a big wealth of opportunity here to maintain those carbon stores in a mangrove forest. Now, what I want to do is just briefly touch upon some of my research, what I've been doing in Indonesia, essentially is looking at how carbon is processed and how it drives what we call the associated biodiversity within a mangrove forest, okay? Now, many studies within ecology with mangrove science will look at the biodiversity of the birds that live in the trees, of the reptile fauna that live on the trees, but also of the associated marine organisms that live on the roots of the mangroves, and also of the animals that live within the mud. Okay, so we get lots of crabs, as you've all seen, as you all know about in Indonesia, lots of crabs, lots of mud crabs. You'll get lots of mollusks, so snails, which are edible. And of course, as you know, you get lots of fish. But what I decided to do many years ago with my research is think about what other habitats can be explored or exploited by animals within a mangrove forest that has never been looked at. So in a mangrove, of course, as we talked about, there's a high abundance of above ground biomass. So in other words, the wood, okay? So this is the form of fixed carbon of the wood. Now, when those trees become old, those trees, all those logs will fall down. And what happens is you get these very funny species called pteridinids, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Here we go. That will begin life as very small larvae in the water column. And I'm sure you guys have seen this, particularly with the Bajau villages, where they have to build their huts on coral rock plinths because the wood gets eaten away by these guys, okay? Now, these guys are in fact mollusks, and they have this wood boring ability to create those holes, as you can see in this piece of wood here. So you see this honeycomb effect of the wood. And what I did was I decided to look in those pieces of wood and look at the biodiversity when these pteridinids actually die. Those tunnels become exploited by a wide range of organisms, okay? So in other words, with increased pteridinid tunnels, you have an increased biodiversity, much like a coral reef. Now, these two graphs below, guys, just simply show that with an increasing number of your pteridinid tunnels in the wood, there's an increasing number of different species of macrofauna. So these could range from fish, they could range from spiders, they could range from polychaete, what we call marine polychaete worms, they could range in crabs and octopus. And these two graphs show the abundance. And what you can see is a positive relationship with increased habitat complexity of the tunnels and the animals found within the wood. And I wanted to find out why those animals were exploiting those pieces of wood. Now, one of those is to avoid extreme temperatures. So here we have a piece of fallen wood, and outside I put some temperature loggers, and inside the wood I put temperature loggers, and I mapped the temperatures of these mangroves at low tide, because we were finding loads of animals inside. And so what we have with an increasing temperature on the outside of the wood, the actual temperature inside of the wood can be up to 14 degrees cooler. So this means we have what we call evaporative cooling process in the pieces of wood. And this graph here is simply showing the rate of cooling over time. And this is me here in the lab on Hogar Island in the Wakatobi in Southeast Sulawesi, measuring these data and these data sets. So in other words, these pieces of wood keep those animals healthy because these are juvenile species which feed the wider food chain. Remember, going back to that connectivity and flow of energy, these pieces of wood are vitally important. So in other words, to keep those fallen pieces of wood in the mangrove keeps the flow of energy and keeps those ecosystems very healthy because it feeds the wider food chain of the species associated to mangrove forests. Now, here we have a map, Southeast Sulawesi, where I worked and did my research. Very fond of this area, and hopefully I can get back to these sites. And actually, in fact, as I'm getting older, my research is changing rather than looking at biodiversity now, but looking at ways to not only conserve and protect the mangroves, but to restore them back to their former glory and see how we can actually monetize it so the communities benefit. But these graphs here, guys, so I worked on an island called Kaladupa. This is Hogar Island. These are a small chain of islands called the Wakatobi. Now, as you can see, the biodiversity in large woody debris, LWD, which is the fallen wood, is far more biodiverse in the abundance of animals compared to the root structures, compared to the sediments. So there's been a huge overlook in the science in how mangroves should be surveyed in terms of their biodiversity. So this is hugely important in actual fact in how we research. Now, these graphs look fairly complicated, but the take-home message with this is just to show you the types of organisms that you can find in fallen wood here, or you can find on the root structures of mangrove forests, or you can find within the mud. Now, as you know, you'll see these fiddler crab species in Indonesia, lots of them. You also have mud crabs. So we found a lot of crabs in the sediment. And on the root structures in mangrove forests, we would find sponges. We would find Littorina species, so small snail-like species, and these Terebralia sulcata, the big whelks. We would find them on the root structures. But inside the pieces of wood, we would find a whole array of different species, but these would be juveniles. So again, very much like the nursery function of mangroves with the fish, the pieces of wood act as a very important nursery function for a wider array of invertebrates that feed the higher food chain. So let's think about a bit of a problem then. Indonesia is very rich in mangrove forests. Now, about 1/4 of the world's mangrove forest in terms of area can be found in a mangrove forest in Indonesia. So it's very important that Indonesia, we keep those mangroves because they're hugely rich and valuable. However, because of coastal development and because of farming, and we're doing this everywhere, we've lost about 1/3 of the mangroves in as many years. So we're losing all of those ecosystem services. So it's very important that we actually restore or stop the loss, but also enhance the conservation and restoration of those ecosystems. And we're losing, this is globally, around about 1 to 2%. Now, in actual fact, it's increasing to about 3% of mangrove area per year. And the loss of wood is exacerbated by many different things. Now, all these images that you see here, guys, are pictures that I've taken during my expeditions in the mangrove. So this is what we call the Bruguera tree. So you would find these in the back reaches of a mangrove. This is the whole mangrove here that was actually cut down and forested. And you see these mangrove poles here that have been taken and chopped to actually make what we call fish fences. There's some fresh trees here that have been cut down. And again, some more clearing here of deforestation. Now, we see mangrove cutting for fish fences. And we see these, particularly lots around Indonesia and Southeast Sulawesi, where the mangrove wood was cut down, but they hoover up lots of the fish, of course, so reducing the biodiversity. Mangrove wood for cooking. This is all essential, but it can be done in a sustainable way. Now, mangrove wood is great for utilizing for construction because it's very strong, and also cooking because it's very dense. And we have these big mangrove wood stores, particularly we saw this in the Wakatobi. But what I want to do, guys, is talk about not gloom and doom, but I want to talk about some huge positives. And I want to talk about carbon accreditation for mangroves. It's very new, okay, and we're succeeding in actual fact at the moment of doing this in Honduras and in Mexico in the Caribbean. So this is what we call payments for ecosystem services. And we believe that they can save mangrove forests. For example, I'm going to give an example actually at the end of the talk of a project that we've got ongoing in Honduras and in Mexico that involves over 5,000 people of the local communities to invest in paid jobs for them to do the restoration. So it's community driven. Okay. So we're going to be looking at carbon credits and also biodiversity credits, because you can use the uplift of the increase and recruitment of the biodiversity with the regeneration and protection of mangroves to give added value to the restoration. Now, we can think about decarbonizing the atmosphere, reducing climate change, but also enhancing the monetary value. And I work with a company called Replanet. It's the same company as Operation Wallacea. And we do some very large restoration projects where we look at mangrove carbon credits. We look at biodiversity credits, so the value of that carbon. Now, as I've already said, remember, a mangrove forest it's about 4 times the amount of carbon in 1 hectare, which is the size of a field. All right, a mangrove forest can store over 1,000 tons of carbon in its soils, so hugely important. And you can actually quantify the uplift of biodiversity from looking at the fish, the invertebrates, the reptiles, the birds, the bats. All of these are key species, and you can look at the juveniles and you can look at the adults as well. So this will provide environmental value, ecological value, and economic value. Now, this will future-proof and make the ecosystem much more resilient, a bit like having a healthy immune system inside your own body. This will drive the riches of that ecosystem, so enhancing its resilience. Now, this is the value of marine ecosystem services, everyone, to think about what we're costing our coastal ecosystems. Now, at the minute, globally, our coastal marine ecosystem services are valued at 50 trillion US dollars per year. Let's say that number again, 50 trillion US dollars per year. Now, remember, we're losing our key rich ecosystems. Now, first and foremost, we need to protect our key systems. We need to restore them and bring those values back, not only globally, but more so for the people locally dependent upon the mangroves. So that money goes to the local communities. So here we are in Indonesia working with Replanet. Hello, did someone say something then?
Putri.
I think someone just accidentally themselves. Yeah, you may continue.
Putra kayak penjara.
Okay, sorry guys, sorry about that. Stop the flow there. So we're looking at restoration of abandoned or underutilized shrimp farms in Indonesia and Southeast Sulawesi. Okay, so this is a big project involving lots of different people, lots of communities, and a big area in 3 different locations. So this is going to be on communal land. Okay, and as you can see here, this incorporates 3 locations but 35 villages, and the people that work in those villages will be benefiting from this communal restoration project. So the 3 districts will cover 4,500 hectares. Now, a hectare, as we've already said, is about the size of a football pitch, so it's a huge area. Now, here are our locations. Okay, we're going to talk about and show some maps of those locations. Now, the financial incentives go to the small-scale fish farms not making the money. So we want to plow the incentives of those carbon-rich ecosystems to the local communities. Okay, so this is very important. This is the ethos, really, of Replanet. So we're going to be converting almost 2,000 hectares of underused or underutilized or impoverished shrimp farms, converting them back to mangrove forest to bring back those riches that we just talked about. Now, as I'm sure you're all aware, we have these NDCs, nationally determined contributions of carbon to the countries. Now, there's going to be no overlap of the NDC, so we're targeting communally owned land. Okay, so not government owned land. This is very important. So here we have the maps that we're going to be working on in Southeast Sulawesi. The green areas, ladies and gentlemen, are the areas that we're working with the local communities to restore back to their former glory. So it's a large undertaking, but as you just found out, we've got 35 villages involved in this. Here's our other site with the other maps. These are our shape files of all the mangroves that we're going to be restoring in those different locations. And again, here in our 3rd region here. So involving lots of different people. And the value of that is that the shrimp farmers not using their impoverished shrimp farms and ponds will receive cash for their land to be reforested for mangrove forest. So in other words, if you don't convert them to shrimp farms, there will be a big monetary uplift for that. Okay. And what we found with our research within those locations, anywhere between around about 40% and up to 75%, those villages had disused shrimp farms, because as you know, they only have a certain amount of life, and then we move on to another area, make a new shrimp farm. But what we want to do is bring back those old shrimp farms and restore them. And within our company, we have lots of experts that can bring back, working with the local communities, to bring back the hydrology, what we call the channels of the water, to bring back the right plant species in the right elevation to look at the actual ecology. 60% of the income from those carbon credits go directly to the local communities. They go directly to the local communities. And with that, as we've talked about, looking at biodiversity uplift, you can look at income streams, for example, looking at increasing the biomass and yield of mud crabs, or looking at bees for making honey, and of course, we're aid towards pollination. And the carbon credit scheme that we create goes to the local communities. And as I've already intimated, 60% of those payments go directly to the local communities. So we have development of various income streams that the communities will benefit from. For example, we're actually creating in areas where people or landowners still want to use the shrimp farms, is having what we call eco-friendly or sustainable shrimp farms, or MPANGs, that we can create a healthy environment. Now, this is very important in actual fact, because here you see in this image here, a disused shrimp farm, and what we're going to be doing is restoring these back to their former glory. And so what you see here is an actual restored shrimp farm, or an eco MPANG. Now, what you have here is the shrimp farm area here, and in the middle of it, or almost over, I think it's something in the region of 60% of the shrimp farm will be restored back to a mangrove. And of course, what the mangrove is doing is uptaking those nutrients, so it's not become what we call eutrophicated with poorly treated water. So it takes up the nutrients, it oxygenates the water, and it provides its own food because of the invertebrates and the organic matter feeding those shrimp. So it's very important. And again, going back to what we call those ecosystem services. So it's an eco-friendly way of farming combined with mangrove restoration. So just going back, guys, I just want to show you some areas that we're doing in Mexico that we also want to do in Indonesia, is looking at hydrological mangrove restoration in areas that are very badly impacted. So this was an area in Honduras, as you can see, heavily cut down, and the soils are now defunct. So almost finished now, guys. And what we have here, as I said, over 5,000 people working with us, and we have people planting mangrove trees here, rechanneling the waterways, which is very, very important. As you can see, lots of people on board. Remember, 60% of the uplift goes to the local communities. And here's an aerial view of it here, where we see the rechanneling feeding the mangrove ecosystem. And what we're doing is replanting those seeds there. And as you can see here, as already mentioned in some of my adventures, I came nose to nose with this very large man-eating reptile, which actually was very, very frightening for me. But the only thing that sprung to my mind was to take a selfie of this large reptile, because I didn't think anyone would believe me, but I could almost touch its nose. So I hope you guys found that okay. I should stop sharing. I do have time for a very brief question, but I do have to go to another meeting. I'm very sorry, ladies and gentlemen, but I hope that was okay.
What a remarkable presentation, Dr. Ian. Thank you very much. You definitely highlighted the importance of mangrove forests, especially in Indonesia. They take up so little, but give so much to the environment, obviously in a good way. Again, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Ian has a very limited time, so probably one question only, Dr. Ian, if that's okay with you. Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions to Dr. Ian, you can just type them into the chat box at the bottom of your screen, or if you'd like to ask him directly. Okay, we have one person actually, Ibu Ayulana. So Ibu Ayulana, if you can unmute yourself and then ask your questions to Dr. Ian, please.
Okay, thank you, Miss Jenny. Thank you so much, Dr. Ian, for beautiful presentation, because I'm also the person who in love in mangrove. So yeah, basically what my question is, you have done share to us that you did this kind of restoration in the Sulawesi, and you say that the shrimp farmers, one of the things is shrimp farmers not use ponds will receive cash for reforestation. So how can you do that? I mean, how you manage the situation so the shrimp farmers will not do that until maybe the end of the day, or how you monitor them?
So,
Thank you.
so thank you for the question. So a very important question. So there's lots of work that has to be done before the monetization. So what we do is we go there and we form working groups to talk about the benefits. Okay. Now, with the company, so I work, as you know, with the University of Portsmouth. I work at the Eden Project as well. I have many roles and I wear many different hats. But when advising for Replanet, who do the restoration, we do these projects all over the world. They work with bankers, okay, so big bankers with lots of money. Now, those companies want to invest in carbon credits. So those companies are paying for the carbon, okay. Now, what they want to do is see an uplift in those carbon measurements over 30 years. All right, because as you know, the mangroves take a long time to sequester and lock in that carbon. It takes a long time. So these would be 30-year projects, but because we have what we call a gold standard accreditation of the rate of carbon drawdown from the mangroves, okay, so it's almost a stamp of approval. What we can do is sell those carbon credits. So those companies that want to invest will invest lots and lots of money up front. 60% of all of that money goes directly to the local communities to work as a team. Now, not to make a shrimp farm, but to make a mangrove. Okay. And what we do every 5 years is go back and measure the carbon uplift, and measure the biodiversity uplift. And of course, there's a big cash injection at the beginning of the restoration project. Then every 5 years or every year, okay, depending on what the activity is, funds will come in to fund the local community to keep the mangroves and keep the fisheries going. But on top of that, not only do they receive the 60% from those carbon credits, but the local communities will benefit because of the local fisheries will improve. So they can catch more fish, they can catch more when they're foraging. So there's a lot more benefit with this system. And we're seeing this in Mexico, we're seeing this in Honduras, and hopefully, well, when we start this project in Indonesia, this will have the same uplift. So this is all very brand new in Indonesia, but we've been doing this already in the Caribbean. So this is something that we're very excited about because, as we said, the actual incentive for the local people is to get the 60% of those credits directly into the local community, so they're earning from it. And of course, there's the associated uplift. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. And maybe one question more. So do you think that company or maybe some companies can cover, I mean, all over the Indonesian, especially to covering the budget? I mean, is it possible?
Absolutely.
Really?
No, absolutely.
Oh,
And so we can take this offline, and I can link you up with Replanet, because they have a bank of resources and money, and they're looking for carbon rich projects to restore. Now, the owner of Replanet is a guy called Tim Coles. Now, Tim Coles will only do projects if they are ethically right. In other words, we will only do projects if it benefits the communities. Okay, and so all of the money, 60% of that money goes towards the local communities. The other amount of money goes towards the actual restoration, if that makes sense. Okay, and so all we want to do is restore back and actually have a very good positive impact on climate change, but also bringing back those valuable ecosystem services. Remember, coastal marine ecosystem services are worth globally 50 trillion US dollars. So we can bring back those ecosystem services that you guys and everybody can benefit from.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ian. That's really
Thank you so much.
if it can happen. Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Jenny.
Wanted to check, Dr. Ian, if you no, one last question, Dr. Ian. Are you still
unfortunately, guys, I've got another meeting pressing. My phone was ringing, so I didn't.
Okay.
So I hope you guys didn't hear it. So I'm being called to jump to another meeting. But it was a pleasure chatting to everybody. So thank you very much for your time, everyone.
Okay, then thank you so much. If that's the case, thank you very much once again, Dr. Ian, and also Ibu Ayu and committee for giving us, this opportunity, alongside with our university partners. If you have any other kind of questions, probably we can have a separate discussion if that's okay with you, with Dr. Ian. And I think that's really all from us. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ibu Ayu, once again. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Ian.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Okay, everybody, take care, and hopefully speak to you soon. Bye bye. Bye bye.